There's this implicit idea that if African Americans willingly and effectively serve in defense of the country, that they will be rewarded after the fact.
There's a French phrase called l'impôt de sang, which is the blood tax, which is that idea. Anyone that sheds blood for the nation is a citizen of that nation. And so that concept was something that many blacks, I believe, would have taken to heart. If I enlist and I fight and I'm wounded or we die, we're showing you that we believe in America, that we want to be Americans, and you should honor and respect that by giving us equal citizenship.
They knew that there was more to this than just an adventure, than just youthful bravado, and to show the world who an American was.
African American men have fought in every battle and every war the United States has had since the Revolution.
The first American to be killed by the British at the Boston Massacre is an African American named Crispus Attucks. You have the 54th Massachusetts during the Civil War becomes the famed unit in the film Glory. You have the Buffalo Soldiers in the Spanish-American War that charge up San Juan Hill. So there's this tradition of African American participation. Henry Johnson is he's an African American who was born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina in the 1890s.
He makes his way up through New York City to Albany,
presumably looking for work and for better opportunities. He's first employed as a laborer in a coal yard, and then eventually at the start of the war as a red cap porter at Albany's Union Station.
Henry Johnson does not fit the stereotype of a war hero. He wasn't some brawling street fighter.
Henry Johnson was a small man of stature. He weighed about 130 pounds soaking wet.
He was a red cap. He was a little guy who spent his pre-war career saying, "Yes, sir, can I take your bag?" "Well, thank you very much."
Henry Johnson was like most African-American World War I servicemen. He was originally from the South. He was illiterate, very persuasive, but he wasn't a learned individual. So he was very different than James Reese Europe, than Noble Sissel, and many of the other luminaries that were also members of the 15th National Guard unit.
War is declared in April. In June, Henry Johnson and several African American men from Albany make the conscious decision to take the train down to New York City and join the New York National Guard. The 15th New York National Guard Infantry is the only African American regiment in New York State.
And that was the precursor to the 369th, or the Harlem Hellfighters, as most people would know them as.
So it was the only avenue that these men had to voluntarily enlist to go to war and to serve their country. The regiment is headquartered in Harlem, and approximately 70% of the men come from Harlem or the immediate surrounding area in New York City, but 30% of the unit comes from elsewhere. One of the most notable exceptions in the 15th New York is their band leader, Lieutenant James Reese Europe.
James Reese Europe was a celebrity. His orchestra played Carnegie Hall. He was one of the most prolific as well as talented African Americans in popular culture at the time.
All of the states are competing to be the first to send its National Guard to war. And New York, having the largest National Guard, is kind of expected to kind of have this preeminent place. So in order to appease the politics of all of these competing states, the War Department establishes a unique, newly formed division, the 42nd Division, that will encompass National Guard units from most of the states and the District of Columbia. New York, because of its primary role, is given the honor of supplying one of the 4 infantry regiments to that division. The 15th New York, as the first to be up to wartime strength, is hopeful that it will be selected, and they are rather bluntly told that black is not a color of the rainbow. The 42nd Division has the nickname the Rainbow Division, which is given to it by its Chief of Staff, Colonel at the time, Douglas MacArthur, who says that the division will span the United States like a rainbow.
The black soldier had to prove himself, to show his worth, because it is put out that there's substandard performers.
There were issues. The most obvious is, how can you fight for a nation that wasn't supportive or was not defending your rights?
To which the only answer is, in a war about nothing, they were the only men fighting for something. When you say you're fighting to make the world safe for democracy, that's almost meaningless to people who grow up with democracy and take it for granted. So when they were fighting for democracy, that wasn't a lofty ideal. That was real, and that was true for themselves and for their families and for their community. So they were actually fighting for a tangible goal.
To compound that, the New York National Guard is sent to basic training at a small town called Spartanburg, South Carolina.
This presents a great problem for the regiment because Spartanburg, South Carolina has very deeply entrenched Jim Crow laws.
To the point where the mayor of Spartanburg goes to the New York Times and says, "We do not want Negro troops in Spartanburg." The 15th New York is only there for a few weeks before the racial tensions become so bad that the War Department sends them back to New York in order to prevent any kind of racial rioting from happening in South Carolina. Colonel Hayward and the men are trained as a combat unit and they want to fight. So Hayward, who had known Pershing prior to the war, lobbies on their behalf.
U.S. troops were stationed under French command because General Pershing didn't want African American troops in the AEF. What he actually did was kill two birds with one stone.
France they were short of manpower, and they wanted soldiers.
And so they're pleading.
General Pershing said, well, I can send them over to the French. They'll be glad to have them. And the Americans got rid of us.
It's the only unit in the entire country that arrives in France with a state designation. It's not the 369th Infantry that arrives in France, it's the 15th New York. And it's actually while in service with the French Army that they learn that they've been redesignated as the 369th Infantry Regiment. General Pershing is not inclined to use black combat troops, so the 15th New York is employed as stevedores and laborers. They're digging latrines, they're building camps for these incoming white troops.
The French gave them their helmets, their weapons. For black soldiers at that time, their training was not into infantry or any type of combat units, but it's more of support units, logistics and all that bit, labor battalions. But this particular unit received some training, and as they trained, they were ready for war.
Initially, the thought was to put them in quiet sectors.
As part of that experience and as part of the tactics of the time, soldiers would be placed out in listening posts in the middle of no man's land, out in front of their mainline battle trenches. So it was on the night of May 14th that Henry Johnson and his fellow soldier, Needham Roberts, were in one of these listening posts.
What you have is at about 2:30 in the morning, Needham Roberts hears a noise. When it sounds like clipping.
He alerts Johnson. The two listen for a little while and realize that there is a German raiding party cutting through the barbed wire. This is not an attack on the mainline trenches. Its goal is to capture these soldiers, to find out who they are, where they came from, and any kind of intelligence that they might be able to give.
Johnson and Roberts immediately start screaming "Corporal of the Guard," which is a sentry term. It is basically to alert the other units that something is happening that's not a part of regular duty, kind of we're under attack.
Johnson and Roberts are both wounded. Roberts is very quickly incapacitated. Johnson continues firing. He fires his rifle until he runs out of ammunition. The Germans are now pouring into their listening post. He uses his rifle as a club until it breaks and notices at that time that several Germans have now picked up Roberts and are dragging him back to their lines. He pursues them, drawing a bolo knife, and proceeds to fight off and prevent Roberts' capture. The German raiding party retreats, but it's still a little while before any help is able to get to them. When help arrives, Roberts is completely unconscious and Johnson is barely conscious. And when he's finally put on a stretcher, he's been wounded 21 times.
That's a hero. That's a hero because sometimes you wonder if heroes are born or heroes are made. I would like to say that Henry Johnson was made.
10-minute comments. Do you think he was a hero?
That story gets back to the United States almost immediately, and it's not just the New York press that picks it up. There are stories about the heroism of these two black soldiers in the Atlanta newspapers, the Dallas newspapers.
Germans called them the Harlem Hellfighters. Must be some tough fellas there.
It's estimated that they repelled a German raiding party of anywhere from 20 to 30 enemy soldiers.
The 369th has always been something of awe.
The Harlem Hellfighters should not be known just for the color of their skin. They were one of the most successful regiments in the entire U.S. Army.
The 369th Infantry was the first in a lot of ways. They were the first ones to reach the Rhine, the first ones to come home after World War I.
They spent more time in combat than any other American regiment.
They served 191 consecutive days in the line in France. They were the first African American unit or unit period in France to receive the Croix de Guerre, which is the French War Cross for heroism.
What made the 369th so special was its cadre of African American officers. Now, we had had black troops fighting for this country since the Revolution, but usually as enlisted personnel. And that sort of created the myth that black people were strong and brave, kind of like horses. They were good for their strong backs, but they certainly couldn't think. And they certainly couldn't think under pressure. And it was specifically the African American officer class, this young, college-educated crop, that scared the bejesus out of the status quo. Because they thought, if these men can lead men in combat, what can they do when they get home? And that was terrifying. Black leaders was the ultimate nightmare of the status quo.
They had a new mindset of that when we were in France, we were treated as equals, and we want that treatment here. And we're not going to accept anything less than the freedom of anybody else.
I like to think that that was the sort of messy beginnings of the 20th century civil rights movement.
This video raises questions, and I need for you to be extremely honest in the comments when answering them. And just so you know, I have 3 questions. Number 1, before this video, have you ever heard the name Henry Johnson? Number 2, who would you like to see me do a video on next? And number 3, what are your thoughts about this video? Please share them in the comments. Please be honest in the comments when answering these questions. Share this video with anyone you deem necessary. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.